Welcome. My name is Rae D'Arc. I hope you all know how to talk because we're going to talk a lot about talking. Since we're not meeting in person, here's a picture of me at a conference, and you can pretend this is what I still look like. Since this is a recording, I'll be available for questions in the chat, and I'll be available live for a few minutes after the presentation. Also, as much as I wish to be with you all in person, this way you can watch the presentation again, pause or listen at 2 times speed, which is my personal favorite way to listen to presentations. For a little bit about me, I'm an author, editor, employee of a bookstore, and book reviewer. I wrote the Haunted Romance trilogy of dark romantic comedies and the Dreaming Princesses series of YA fairy tale retellings. Books are pretty much my life. I love to talk about books and analyze what makes good books, especially great novels. One thing that really sets great novels apart from boring textbooks is dialogue. For this presentation, I'm going to show you how to write natural dialogue for unique characters by discussing different concepts you can consider before you start writing, while you're writing, and how to go back to self-edit your work to make sure it flows. First, I want to help you understand the importance of dialogue and how it can make or break your story. Talking is hard sometimes. I can't tell you how many times I've stopped in the middle of a sentence to realize that I don't know what to say next. So I end up saying, blah, words. Warning, I will possibly do that sometime during this presentation, despite it being a recording. But how many of you see a textbook page like this slide background and just feel tired? Dialogue helps break up the descriptions. So much that a common way to info dump without it feeling like an info dump is to introduce the new concept through dialogue as one character introduces or explains what's happening to another. When using dialogue to give exposition, you explain the information and show characteristics based on how each character gives and receives the information. Dialogue also pulls the reader into the action, like this conversation is happening right now, and the readers are listening in like little eavesdroppers. It can change the pacing as expositions can have lengthy conversations, while fight scenes are quick and snappy comments. Dialogue also adds imagery through sound, whether it's whispered or yelled. Dialogue can help your reader imagine the scene happening. Also, dialogue helps define characters by showing how they talk to others and about others or the situation. A kidnapping orc, for example, might talk very differently than the kidnapped princess. If not, then I'm very curious about your refined kidnapping orc or your rugged princess. All of these reasons are why using dialogue as a first line is kind of a shortcut, cop out, almost gimmick. But this is English, meaning we have exceptions to every rule. So here's an example. This is the first page of Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, and notice it is purely dialogue. In case you can't read it, it says, I've watched through his eyes, I've listened through his ears, and I tell you, he's the one. Or at least as close as we're going to get. That's what you said about the brother. The brother tested out impossible, for other reasons, nothing to do with his ability. Same with the sister. And there were doubts about him. He's too malleable, too willing to submerge himself in someone else's will. Not if the other person is his enemy. So what do? Surround him with enemies all the time? If we have to. I thought you said you liked this kid. If the buggers get him, they'll make me look like his favorite uncle. All right, we're saving the world after all. Take it. End quote. This gives us less description than a script, as we have no scene setup or character names. But just through the dialogue, we learn about two people plotting the future of a boy who has a brother and a sister and the chance to save the world. Gripping, right? For a second example, here's the first sentence of Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. It says, it's funny, Vasher thought. How many times, or how many things begin with me getting thrown into prison? End quote. We see Vasher's thoughts, which is internal dialogue. Internal dialogue can create deeper characters as we get into their heads. We see Vasher's humor, his name, prison setting, and some idea of a plot that was just thrown in there. This has happened before, and more things are about to happen, all within one sentence of dialogue. Okay, we get it. Dialogue is important, but how do we use it in your story? Have you ever walked into a conversation at a weird moment and wondered, what were they just talking about and how can I jump into this conversation? Or you're in the middle of a conversation with someone and thought, this sentence taken out of context could be very misunderstood. You don't want your readers to feel like that, unless, of course, you do, like Orson Scott Card's first page of Ender's Game. Again, this is English, we have exceptions. But normally, you want your dialogue to drive the story forward, to flow, and build trust with your readers. You can do this by making your characters' words seem natural to the story and to their characteristics. If you have a lone character, though, let them mutter to themselves like Smeagol versus Gollum. Give them an object or a pet to talk to, like in Castaway or I Am Legend. You can also show their thought process with internal dialogue, like what we saw with Vasher. Human beings need to express their concerns and feelings to something to help us sort out our thoughts so that we don't feel alone. My personal method to add dialogue is that I often start with dialogue. Most of my scenes begin as conversations in my head. Then I fill in the scene around them so they aren't two voices in a white room like they are in the first page of Ender's Game. For example, a lot of my scenes start out basically like a script. This is one of the first scenes I wrote for Don't Date the Haunted, as my main character makes plans to move from her land or her homeland of horror to a new land of romance. Then the next step is embellishing the words to fill in the scene by adding her actions and reactions, emphasizing the contrast between the cultures of romance and horror in the story. This also shows my main character's culture shock as she interacts with romantics for the first time. This is only the second step, though, and if you read this scene in the published form, you'll see I've made a lot more edits and embellishments since this draft to describe my main character's surroundings and life in horror. I understand that not everyone thinks of scenes by start or beginning with conversations, but anyone can start by collecting quotes. I've collected quotes since the seventh grade, but it's a lot easier to do now with the internet and search tools. Whenever I think my story's lacking, I have pages of quotes to pull from inspirational thoughts, romantic moments, and witty jokes to mold into my stories. To keep a I suggest you keep a file of quotes and conversations, then this is important. Organize them so you can find them again. You can collect quotes from social media, from people watching or watching TV. Yes, I'm giving you permission to watch TV for research. Write down sayings that make you think or laugh. If you have kids, write down the crazy things they say, even if you don't have kid characters, because they can be used for hilarious adults. All right, now that we know how to add dialogue, let's look at how to find your characters' unique voices. This includes your character's personality, their background, and also body language. As a word of caution, in all this fun character creation, you don't need to do everything, especially if you're a discovery writer or pantser like I am. You will discover things about your characters as you write their stories. Just as people can get stuck in the black hole of world building, don't overanalyze your characters until they're too complicated. Even if you're a hardcore planner, take notes to be aware of these concepts and ideas, then just pick a few to get you going or use them if you get stuck. All right, so let's start with getting to know them, getting to know all about them. That was The King and I, in case I was too off tune for you to tell. If you want to find how your character talks, you need to know who they are. Try a personality quiz on them, such as the Myers Briggs, 5 love languages, Enneagram, or color codes. If you do these tests for all of your main characters, you'll see where your characters might agree or disagree. Then, or even, no, sorry, uh, the words. With every piece you learn about them, try writing a scene that explores that part about them, even if it's not included in your book. These are a few of my personal favorite quizzes, and trust me, they're all more legitimate than the "Which Disney princess are you?" quiz. Again, don't overwhelm yourself though, doing all of these for every character in your book. Just consider your main characters and specific points where they might conflict with others. To dive into their backgrounds, let your setting and characters' ages influence their words. Talking about kids again, kids generally talk with extremes, like, I wish I owned every pony in the world. They're generally emotionally involved with everything they do, but they're also less self aware and don't always know why they act as they do. Then consider the time period, especially if it's set on Earth. What slang is specific to their time period? Then consider, where did they grow up? What is the setting of their hometown? And think about how that can change your character's speech. Are they someone who rejects their heritage and goes out of their way to sound different, like T.S. Eliot, who was born in St. Louis, Missouri, but talked with the Queen's English accent? Does their accent slip with certain words or when they get emotional? Do they talk with slurs? Regarding accents and slurs, I will put a warning on this part because anyone who's read Mark Twain knows that too much of this can turn off your reader. Consider instead Hagrid. He's not one of the main 3 characters, so readers get breaks from him, and his slurs are maybe 1 or 2 every sentence, giving the reader enough context to figure it out. The key is to let your words add to the story, not distract from the story. Digging deeper into their hometown and society, research some slang and idioms. Slang and idioms are great at adding flavor because they reflect societies like commonly known metaphors, almost like a code language. But because it can be like a code, I'll repeat my warning. Anyone who's read Shakespeare or James Joyce knows that too much of this, again, can turn off your reader. On a similar line, I'll warn you from using slang that you heard yesterday for the first time because it's very possible you'll never hear it again. Slang can go in and out with the season, so be careful about about being too specific with your slang, or you might pigeonhole your story to a specific area at a specific time. With all these warnings, yes, slang and idioms can add flavor, but one phrase can go a long way. If you use anything that your general audience won't understand, maybe explain it to another character or add enough context surrounding the idiom for your readers to read between the lines. Now, let's look at what their home was like. Was their home the kind of place where they were taught that children are meant to be heard, not seen, or seen, not heard? Or was it with a lot of talkative people and friendly, community friendly environment? Speaking from experience, those who grow up in talkative homes are used to interrupting, rambling, leaving phrases unfinished because they're used to being interrupted. If you have a rambler or someone who's really nervous, you can show this as they might answer their own questions, use run on sentences, and say everything that's on their minds, whether it's a minor or major tangent. Supposing that they're rambling in front of someone, consider how the listener reacts. Do they interrupt them, ignore them? Are they annoyed? Or do they understand? This is just who their friend is. This quote is from The Princess Bride by William Goldman. From the scene as Buttercup confesses her love to Wesley, he stands there while she rambles on, then closes the door on her face without a single word. The punk. For people who talk a lot, they often interrupt themselves when they're distracted. This is a realistic and humorous way to add voice to a character as you can show their focuses in life. If they were distracted before the conversation started, you can show their distraction with yeah, or whatever simple affirmatives are common to your characters. If it's your point of view character who's distracted, you can easily show them tuning out by letting the dialogue drift into ellipses and their character or your character starts thinking about something else. Depending on how attentive your speaker is, you may show them catching your character not listening, then show their reactions to being ignored. On that line, consider how you speak. Do you speak with run on sentences or start sentences with conjunctions? I have personal issues with get, just, and thing, but you can get away with just about anything with dialogue. Same goes with grammar. Allow some of your characters to talk like you do. Words that you generally avoid in narration, you can be allowed in dialogue. A conference panelist once said, as a writer, you're not allowed to have a favorite word, but your characters can and probably should. Speaking of favorite words, your teenagers and adults should swear according to their culture. This includes swearing with replacement words like gosh or crap if that's their culture. These replacement words are especially helpful when writing books for teens to let them express their emotions without getting too vulgar for your readers. Find words that are appropriate to your setting and characters. Who are their divinities? Where is their place of misery? And how can you curse someone to go there? And or you can use a single verb that works as a noun, because English is fun like that. This speech bubble has a little Mad Lib to show how fun English is. So you have that bleeping bleeper bleeped their bleep, or that cursing cursor cursed their curse. Isn't English fun? Moving on to a more formal topic, consider your character's training. A lot of people use filler words unless they've specifically trained it out of their diction, such as public speakers of any sort. Is your character someone from the military who likes to address others and be addressed formally? Are they someone who knows they're in charge by making demands rather than asking, would you or could you? Are there certain phrases that are hard for them to say, like the pleasantries of thank you, I'm sorry, or please? Or if they're like me, do they say them too often? And contractions. I didn't realize I was passionate about contractions until I saw them done badly. So I'm going to explain how to write without them the right way. Usually writers avoid contractions to portray older, historical, and or formal characters. The wrong way to remove them from someone's diction is to write completely normally, then go through and expand every I am, they have, that she would, did not, etc. Can you see how this becomes very clunky and annoying to read? It sounds like a story told by data. Of course, if you want to portray robots, children, or non native speakers, this is fine. But the last thing a writer wants to do is to distract the reader from the story. When contractions are removed carelessly, the words themselves become a distraction. Writing without contractions the right way can still portray an older historical and or formal character, but feels more natural. The key is simple. Expand your vocabulary and play with syntax. Instead of saying she did not like the prince, say she disliked the prince. Ta-da! See how easy that was? See how much cleaner it is? How about I do not know? A medieval prince might instead say, I know not, or who knows? Or you can get creative with that knowledge evades. Taking the example from the previous slide, one option would say she would be there, she should be there if they forget to lock her up. To use another reference from The Little Mermaid, don't underestimate the importance of body language. A researcher of body language once broke down the components of a face-to-face conversation. He said, communication is 55% nonverbal, 38% vocal, like tone and inflection, and 7% words only. That's why emojis are so popular and texts are still so confusing. Researchers at University of Geneva and University of London separately found that even newborns as old as a few days can distinguish and prefer happy faces over fearful faces. Speaking statistically, it's more feminine trait to talk more, use bigger hand motions and facial expressions. For a statistically masculine trait, you can use more sound effects. I personally snort and groan. Blah, words. So I let my less refined characters do it too, whether they're feminine or masculine or they, them, all the fun things. All the fun things. So, whether or not your character talks a lot, they can still say a lot through their physical cues. This is because our outward actions are often influenced by our internal sensations. A study published by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences shows that our emotions are linked with universal body signatures. They say these bodily responses to certain emotions are distinct and culturally universal. If you look at the top right picture of anger, the heat in the hands explains why people clench their fists when they're angry. Also, shame in the bottom right looks like Spider Man and it is black. However, please note that how people convey their internal sensations through body language and gestures is not universal. Dance moves that we may consider innocent can be shocking to other cultures. The concept of bowing or showing respect to someone varies between societies. Even within the English language, we have different meanings for the same gesture. American Sign Language is based off of French Sign Language, not British. So even our alphabet signs are different. Consider the classic thumbs up. Before emojis, this simply meant good. Now it has taken on a connotation of, I like it. However, if you're scuba diving, this can mean you're drowning and you need to surface. If you want help with body language, I highly suggest the Emotion Thesaurus by Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi. By looking at the emotion your character is feeling, they list physical signs, internal sensations, and mental responses for that emotion. They also describe cues of someone suppressing that emotion or feeling that emotion long term and what it might escalate to. One last thing before we move on, we need to recognize that our characters are on journeys. While going over these details of hometown, home life, formalities, and body language, it's natural to think my character would talk this way at point A in my story, but at point B, they would talk differently. Characters are based on people, and people change as they learn, grow, and face different experiences. When they change goals, situations, or beliefs, consider how it changes their dialogue. For example, consider Han Solo from Star Wars Episode 4. When we first meet him, he would rather shoot Luke than tell him, "May the Force be with you." But after their experiences together, he has a paradigm shift that gives us this beautiful piece of dialogue that shows how he's changed. But character changes don't always need to be huge arcs. Maybe it's just around certain people. I mentioned earlier about accents slipping when people get emotional. Think about certain situations or people that might alter their character's formality or humor. Many people who swear a lot have learned to suppress their swearing around certain people. All right, now that we know how to add our dialogue and how characters talk, let's start writing. Again, for discovery writers or pantsers, this is where you'll discover who your characters are and how they change as the story progresses. And that's where style sheets can come in handy. We're also going to compare and contrast natural dialogue with realistic and variable dialogue for your characters. So let's start with a word of caution. Realistic does not always mean natural. Realistic speech can be awkward and annoying to read. Real people stumble, stutter, and say ums and buts. This pictures a reference to the TV show How I Met Your Mother, as one of the characters has a habit of saying, but so much to the point that the other characters turn it into a drinking game. While stutters, stumbles, and excessive filler words are natural to listen to, readers will think the character's lying or hiding something. Don't believe me? Here's an example from one of my own voice messages. Please don't judge me. um, anyway, we did one of those like auction things and they wanted things to auction. So I, said that I will give a beginner's lesson in harp. And someone bought it for $20, which yeah, is a steal. But she's like a professional jazz piano player. Like she did a gig yesterday and so yeah, it's like she's very talented. All right. When spoken aloud with my normal speed and inflections, you don't notice all of the awkward phrasing. But here's what it looks like when it's written down. Again, please don't judge me. Can you imagine this as an AI audiobook? In case you're unable to read it, here's how it goes with the voice of Siri. Haha. Anyway, we did one of those like auction things, and they wanted things to auction. So I, said that I will give a beginner's lesson in harp. And someone bought it for $20, which, yeah, is a steal. Ha ha. But she's like a professional jazz piano player. Like she did a gig yesterday. And so yeah, she's like very talented. All right, that was painful. It sounds like Siri was hacked by a Valley Girl, which yes, I am. In reality, people talk past each other, talking more about what they're thinking rather than actually listening or responding to each other. Truly listening to other people is not always inherent. Many people need to train themselves to listen carefully instead of thinking of similar experiences to share or even worrying about what to say next. Minds wander and silence can feel awkward. Make your dialogue move things forward. If you read, "Hi, how are you? Fine, how about you? Good, it's hot out there." That's boring. We don't want to read small talk unless you want the scene to feel awkward. I learned at another writing conference that the most boring dialogue is when everyone agrees. When characters disagree, it clarifies their beliefs and or motivations. Family members raised in the same town by the same parents may talk similarly, but even twins will have different diction as they have different ideas and thought processes. Unless your characters are clones of each other, they should each have their own perspectives and angles of understanding. Actually, never mind. Even most clones have different perspectives. Style sheets are a great way to organize and keep track of your characters' voices for consistency. These are something you can work on before, during, or after you write, depending on how much of a plotter you are. For those who've never heard of style sheets, these are helpful tools for editors to keep your story consistent. It's a single document that you can share with an editor to outline who your characters are, the correct spellings of their names, what's their diction like, and any other notes you have on them. Style sheets also outline your story's timeline and locations, but the main point is whatever you discover about your characters, file it in whatever writing organizer you use so that it can be properly applied throughout your story. All right, so you have your draft done, but what if your dialogue still isn't working? Don't worry, that's why we edit. I'm going to suggest a few different ways to look at your manuscript to emphasize your dialogue and help you see where it can improve. We'll look at the benefits of reading your story out loud, separating your dialogue, analyzing your taglines, and the overall flow of your words. So, one way to make sure that your dialogue and story in general feels natural is to read it out loud. This is a common practice for authors. It takes me at least 2 days, and I lose my voice after, but I do it with every book because every time I find things that aren't caught by spell check or even editors. Even better, if you can find someone with the time and reason, ask someone else to read your story to you. They will stumble on all of your clunky sentences and help you figure out where to smooth things out. Otherwise, you can put it in a Microsoft Word or another program with text to speech capabilities to read your story aloud and check for any confusing parts. When reading your dialogue and story aloud and stumble on those clunky sentences, the answer is not to add extra emphasis. Adding italics brings attention to that word and can distract the reader from the story. It's a general rule that if you don't need to emphasize a word, then don't. There are other, more subtle ways to emphasize words without using italics, such as removing contraction or repeating a phrase. The particular example I'm showing is from Levinthump's and the Gateway to Fu by Orbit Sky. It's a middle reader, which allows characters to be a bit more dramatic. Also, the character speaking, Sabine, is the big bad guy who's selfish and power hungry. And to emphasize this characteristic, Mr. Sky italicizes every time Sabine says I, me, and my. All right, now this next part might seem a little obvious or less important, but these little details can go a long way. That's right, we're talking about taglines. Check if all of your taglines are in the same places and consider what their locations do to the flow of your statements. Take this quote from Howard Taylor's short story, An Honest Death. It says, "Thank you, sir," I say. "Very generous, sir. Sorry about the chair thing," says Barry. "I'll make sure Barry spends his bonus on better inserts," says Mo. "We'll leave you to your business, sir." And we do. End quote. Notice all of the taglines are at the end, creating a formal, almost awkward tension as the characters address their employer because they know he's lying to them. Let's look at what happens to the flow if we change where the dialogue tags go. "Thank you, sir. Very generous, sir," says Barry. "Sorry about the chair thing." Mo chuckles. "I'll make sure Barry spends his bonus on better inserts. We'll leave you to your business, sir." And we do. End quote. Did you notice the difference in how? Oh, okay, it's actually not the quote. Yeah. It's rearranged, but did you notice a difference in how it flows? By putting all of the taglines at the end, Howard Taylor added to the awkwardness of the scene. You can use the taglines to create pauses in your dialogue, and switching their positions can help the conversation flow more naturally. Speaking of pauses, sometimes we don't want them. Let interruptions feel like interruptions by putting the next line of dialogue directly after the interruption. In a later part of the same story by Howard Taylor, we get an interruption. By putting the tagline first, the tagline itself interrupts the interruption. Instead, Mr. Taylor kept the conversation flowing naturally without the taglines pausing it. This increased the pace and tension of the moment. I mentioned earlier that dialogue tags like whispered, yelled, can help the reader visualize the scene, and for some reason, grade school teachers hate the word said. However, to use the same selection from Howard Taylor's short story, if we replace the simple word of say with more colorful words, they can become distracting. Again, the last thing a writer wants to do is to distract the reader from the story. Said and asked are invisible, so use them where you can, but even better, if you don't need them, don't use them. In fact, try removing them altogether and see what it does to your story. If you can't tell who's speaking without the taglines, then go back to your character exploration and make your character's dialogue more unique. Another way to focus on your dialogue flow is to look at your story like a script or comic. If you cut out everything except your dialogue, will you still have a story? Look at examples of scripts or comics if you need help with this. This example is from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, or What You Will. This is the first scene of the first act, introducing Orsino, the Duke of Illyria. Based on his words alone, we can hear sweet and heartbreaking music that matches his mood. Consider what descriptions can you turn into dialogue. Another way to self-edit your dialogue is to go through and highlight all of your dialogue with different colors for each character. This takes a lot of time and dedication, but if you're struggling with your dialogue or with juggling your characters' voices, I highly suggest it. When you're going through, these highlights can point out any large areas that might benefit from dialogue or places that need more description. so they aren't speaking in empty rooms. Also, you'll notice if you're not actually sure who's talking. Then later, if you change any character voices, you can quickly find their words and fix them for consistency. This is an example from my book Dreaming Beauty, as my main three characters discuss Emmer's hypoesthesia, or her disability to feel anything other wool. You may notice the banter between the yellow and the blue speaker, and the formal voice of the pink speaker. Here's another example of highlighting dialogue from Tracy Hunter Abramson's book, Not Dead Yet. I chose this example because this series deals with multiple characters who all go by the code name Ghost, who also deal with covert special operatives and have various aliases. However, Mrs. Abramson portrays her characters with distinct features and characteristics, enough that in another book of hers, Drop Zone, she has a cameo ghost whose name is never revealed. And yet, we can pick out his character based on his motorcycle and, of course, his diction, or actually lack thereof, because he's not one who talks a lot. Here are my references, in case you care. There are a lot of them. And that's all for me. You can contact me or learn more about my books on my website or Facebook or Instagram. And it looks like we have time for questions. I'd love to hear them and help out with anything I didn't answer already. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your time at WriteHive. Thank you for coming.